You're listening to the Sales Hunter podcast. My name's Mark Hunter. And hey, is AI just doing nothing but amplifying bad behavior? Oh, come on. Can we cut to the chase? Sure, we can, because that's what AI is doing. Helping me unpack this conversation, we've got Andy Paul. The show begins right now.
You're listening to the Sales Hunter podcast with Mark Hunter, where the focus is to help you as a sales leader sell with confidence and integrity. And now here's your host.
Let's cut to the chase. AI is unfortunately allowing bad behavior to be amplified even more. To help me unpack it today, you know him. He's the voice of sales out there, been out there for decades. Tremendous insight, Andy Paul. Welcome to the show.
Mark, as always, pleasure to join you.
Hey, let's talk about this whole thing because, again, we're seeing, SaaS came along 20 years ago and it allowed bad behavior to be amplified. Now we get SaaS 2.0. It's called AI. Oh, man, where's this train headed? How do we get back to what selling really is?
Well, it's a good question. Can we get back to what selling really is? This is obviously, we're going through a phase right now where, people are so excited about the potential of AI and what it potentially may do for them. But no one really talking about what it's potentially going to do for the customers, right? The prospects, the people making the buying decisions. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. And I think that I'll put in a couple of frames. One is, for years I've talked about the importance of win rates in sales. And so just a hard truth is that, if your win rates are 30%, 20%, on average, and SaaS has been low 20s. But even if you're at 30%, 35%, your default mode of operation is one of failure, right? I mean, you're losing more often, right?
Major problem.
And when that's the case, and what all the work I've done over the decades has shown is that if you're a salesperson that's sort of operating in that band of low win rates where 90% plus of sellers exist, the buyer's making their purchase decision in spite of you, not because of you.
Okay, that was a drop the mic moment. The buyer is making the decision in spite of you.
Yeah, because you have to assume that if you're only able to win one of every 4 of your deals, or your most qualified opportunities, or 1 out of 3 even, well, then you're not able to influence the decision. You're not having an influence over the decisions the buyer's making.
Well, and the problem that I see is AI just allows us to flood the marketplace that much more. It allows us to create mini Andys, mini Marks, and we go out there with more voices, and all it does is create a more confused. So maybe the question is this: is AI been used purely to help the salesperson to the pure detriment of the customer? And that's why we're seeing close ratios continue to decline and all the issues.
Well, I think at this point in time it is. Yeah. Then the initial rush, and that's what we're seeing. We're still in such early days with AI, is just take LinkedIn as a sample, right? If you were to spend any amount of time on LinkedIn and read any of the posts from kind of the sales world of AI, it's almost all about top of funnel stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pipeline gen. And it's like, but is that really the issue? Right? I mean, there's all this sort of frantic tone about so much on LinkedIn is, we just don't have enough pipeline. And my contention is always, well, if you're a sales team and your average win rate across your sales team is 20%, you've got more than enough pipeline. You're just really lousy at selling.
Thank you.
And fix the selling part first before you get frantic about pipeline. Because, well, go ahead.
I mean, the easiest route has been, because so many SaaS tools are geared around pipeline generation, lead generation, et cetera, that we've been just conditioned into this whole thing. Just get a bigger pipe, put more leads in there, do more cycles. And it just creates
it's not how you grow, right? I mean,
thank you.
I get this, I get a kick out of, it's like suddenly revealed wisdom is, the startups of the future. startups of today, yeah, you're not going to need big sales teams because we're going to have AI and we're going to do all this stuff. And it's like, okay, here's how I grew with successful companies as a sales leader and startups is I'd come in, and usually I was brought in sort of to help turn things around a little bit. But sometimes in the very early days as well. And my goal is always, how can I triple net new business without adding a single headcount?
Mm-hmm.
And the way we do that is we learn how to actually help the buyer make a decision to purchase what we're selling.
Mm-hmm.
And fundamentally, it's even more fundamental than that. We really focus on how do we help the customer make the decision to make a change? Because this is a part I think so many sellers miss, is they go right to the end game. I want them to make the decision to buy my product. But before they can make a decision to buy your product or to buy from you as a company, they first have to decide, are we going to make this change or not? And that is the single biggest milestone, sort of mid funnel, that most salespeople just sort of zoom right by.
Okay, let's unpack that, because I truly believe that's the biggest competitor for any salesperson is the customer deciding to make no decision. They just make no decision, right?
Well, right. But I think there's clarity here that's required for salespeople is they all say, well, they've decided to stick with what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what's happening. What the buyer is saying is, I made the decision not to buy from you.
Right.
That's very different. You didn't give me a reason to buy from you. I didn't decide the status quo is better than what's out there. It's just that you didn't help me make this decision to make a change. And this is where the failure point is, because there's a point pretty early in most sales processes where the buyer has to decide, look, are we going to commit time and effort to actually making a change or not? Not buy this product A or buy product B. Are we going to change or not? And where they're looking for sellers to help them. And it really depends on the product, right? If you're to draw a straight line, I call this a spectrum. On one end is what I call transactional decisions or transactional products. And on the other end are transformational products. And every product in the world sits on that spectrum between transactional and transformative or transformational. Well, what's happened in sales is we've tried to sell transformations like transactions. And we're not helping the buyer in the way they need to be helped to say, well, this is a pretty significant change. How are you helping me define what my problems are? How are you helping me define the outcomes we want to achieve by making a change? How are you helping me define how we want to address this problem? Instead, you look at the typical sales process. Said, well, I'm going to discover your requirements. Well, that works on a transactional product. I discover your requirements because they're not going to change. But if it's transformational and starts trending toward that side of the spectrum, I'm not discovering the requirements. I'm helping them define the requirements. I'm helping them define their problem. I'm helping them define the outcomes they want to achieve. If I do that, then I start having an impact or an influence over what the decisions the buyer is making.
Huge. Okay, now you've shared a lot, as you always do every time I get you on the show. I want to come back to this transformation versus transactional, because I think too many salespeople view what they sell as being transformational, when really it's just transactional.
Yeah. I mean, and what happens is Neil Rackham wrote about this almost 30 years ago at this point in his book, Rethinking the Sales Force, is buyers are very astute at understanding whether a certain type of product is one they can expect to receive value from the sales channel for, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm buying paper clips. What value does the sales channel have? None. I don't need you. And let's start working our way up towards transformational products, like a new ERP system for the enterprise. There is a point at which it transitions, but prior to that, and this is why you have to really understand the customer and be able to have this, build a relationship where you have some trust and they'll reveal these things to you. If they view it as transactional, they don't need you. And that's fine. That line of what constitutes a transactional product has morphed incredibly over the last 30 years, right? I mean, 30 years ago, no one was buying really complex products online without talking to salespeople. Shoot, now people do.
Yeah. But now, does AI allow the customer to be able to make more of those transformational purchases, transactional, in nature?
I don't know if it does that, but I think what it does is it certainly helps them not be as reliant on the salespeople to come to them with sort of transformative ideas that help them think differently about what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, a good salesperson should be using AI for sort of these ideation purposes to help them say, okay, I've got this type of customer. I see examples about call prep all the time as, what are the 3 things that are most important to somebody in this position? Fine. But it's really, as a seller, especially on a more transformational type product, you're there to help them think about things that they hadn't thought about themselves, right? Ask them the questions. In fact, this is, I think, why buyers agree to talk to salespeople is they say, look, maybe hoping against hope in some cases, but I don't know if you remember this, but there's this, back in the early 70s, there was a Professor Mark, I forget his name, Groenenvetter or something, who developed this idea of social network theory. And what he said is that, we have these people that are sort of, acquaintances, and, there's sort of layers on an onion. And he called it strong ties and weak ties, right? We have people that we have strong ties with, their colleagues and so on, and people we have weak ties with. And he said, the problem is that within an organization where people have strong ties, is over time, they all start to know the same crap. Right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We all wind up living in the same bubble. Right.
Yeah. So he called that, everybody knows redundant information. So if you're looking to make a decision to purchase something that's transformative and transformational for your organization, talking to your people internally, and maybe in people in your peer group that are in your network group that you speak to a lot, you all know the same stories and the same myths and the same legends, the same facts. Is the savvy person knows you need to go talk to somebody you have a weak connection with, not a strong tie, but a weak tie with, in order to ask you the questions you didn't think to ask yourself. And this is the role that salespeople really, the buyers look to salespeople to play. And AI can certainly help a seller prepare for a call and think about ideas that are outside the box if they use it that way, if they're curious. But if you're lacking curiosity as a seller, AI is not going to help you become curious.
Okay, this is so key because I really do believe that the most successful salespeople are the ones who are absolute curiosity seekers. They are curious in everything. And salespeople are trying to use AI as, oh, this is helping me solve my, no, it's not. It's putting you into a smaller bubble because you describe the customers being in a bubble. I think salespeople are in a bubble. And unfortunately, those bubbles don't play well together.
No. And that's, they've been in. So here's the issue. Talk about the bubbles here for a second in my mind. And this is where, AI, it's not a matter of AI. It's not a matter of a specific methodology or whatever. Is you either understand what the buyer is trying to achieve, what they need your help to do, or you don't. And tools that you're using isn't going to change that. You as an individual have to change your understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. And then you can better apply AI and so on to help you do that. And so this is the nub of the matter. Most salespeople think their job is to sell their product. But it's not. Their job is to help the buyer make the decision to change.
Right? Okay. That's huge. What you just said is absolutely huge. Listeners, back up by 15 seconds and listen to what Andy said again, because that's absolutely spot on. Unpack that for us.
Well, think about it. Your buyers aren't out there, your customers aren't out there trying to say, look, I want to buy this product. They're saying, look, I want to achieve this outcome, right? And this outcome is a change of state from the current state that we're in. So that's really the decision they're making, is to make a change. The second order decision is who we're going to change with.
Right.
So if you look at it from a very logical framework is the first thing that a buyer has to decide is and understand is what's the problem, right? We think we want to make a change, but really, in order to make a decision to change, we really understand what our current state is.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Go in and assume that the buyer knows what that is, but the buyer maybe doesn't really fully understand what that is. And this is where you can help as a seller, help them define what the problem really is.
I love where you're going with that, because I find too many salespeople, it's just a race to sell the product, assuming the customer already wants to change. And I think we're finding, I'd love to get your perspective on it. Right now, customers are more hesitant to change than ever. In other words, they're focusing on their top one or two priorities. And if I, as a salesperson, can't help you address your top one or two priorities, there's no sale. There's no opportunity. Agree?
Well, right. But you're never going to get that opportunity if you just come in pitching a product.
Right.
And this is, we started touching this before, is, as a seller, if you're saying, okay, the first job I'm trying to do, and I think there are 4 or 5 decisions that go into making a change decision. And the first decision is, what's our problem, right? Mm-hmm. is coming to a decision about an agreement of what your problem is. Yeah, most sellers these days increasingly think, the customer's so self-educated on this, they understand what that is. And it's like, well, no, right? Because in certain markets, we can take SaaS as an example, certain segments in SaaS, not to pick on them. But if you've read Barry Schwartz's book on the paradox of choice, he talks about going into a grocery store and hey, where there used to be 6 types of Oreos or 1 type of Oreo, now there's a dozen types of Oreo, right? How do I choose, right? And he called that the paradox of choice. Well, the paradox is not that there's, in SaaS, for instance, if let's say there's roughly 40 or 50 companies that offer products, conversational intelligence products, right? The problem for the buyer isn't that there's too much choice, it's there's actually no choice, because they all do the same things at the same price. That's not a choice, right? That's the problem that holding up the buyer is that, the products are undifferentiated. And then when the sellers come in, the selling experience is undifferentiated. They're not overwhelmed by choice, they're overwhelmed by the lack of actual choice. And this is something people really need to understand is in competitive markets, this is the problem. Buyers aren't overwhelmed by too many choices, they're overwhelmed by the lack of real choice. And this is where the opportunity for you as a salesperson to come in and say, look, I'm not trying to sell the product, I'm trying to help you make this decision to change. Suddenly that experience just from the get-go from the customer is differentiated from what they're getting with the competitors. And that's how you stand out in this. And so if I come in and say, look, I'm trying to ask questions to help you define what your problem is. I'm not trying to discover your problem. I'm trying to help you define. And so when you do that, then what you're putting yourself in the position of is exerting an influence over the decisions the buyer makes. And I challenge sellers to say, okay, let's look at this idea about defining a problem. Put 2 boxes on a piece of paper. Say, okay, what was the customer's definition of the problem when you first talked to them? What is the buyer's definition of that problem right now? Write the answer in 2 boxes. If it's the same, you've had no influence on the decision of the buyer, which means that you're basically going to compete on price and features. And this is so critical for sellers. If you really want to get serious about winning a higher fraction of your deals, is you have to help shape the buyer's definition of what the problem is. Once you define the problem is, well, why do they want to make a change? Well, that has to do with what the outcomes they're going to achieve, right? If you do the same exercise again, what was the buyer's definition of what the outcomes they wanted to achieve were when you first talked to them? Box 2, what is their definition of the outcomes they want to achieve now? If it hasn't changed, you haven't influenced the buyer's definition of that, your odds of winning are pretty low. This is an example of how they're going to buy. They may decide ultimately to buy from you, but in spite of you, not because of you.
Andy, you've just given us a masterclass And you've given us a lot with which to chew on, because this is without a doubt, I think, maybe not the number one issue, but one of the top 2 or 3 issues salespeople are struggling with, because they're not differentiating themselves.
Mhm.
And they think that they can use various tools or whatever to just flood the marketplace. And that's going to cause enough people to raise their hands and say they're interested. And it's not. And it's not. But then you ended what you shared. It's why we wind up selling on price and features,
Mhm.
because we really haven't done our job. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we haven't done the job the buyer needs us to do for them, right?
Yeah.
And then at that point, then sure, they sort of close their eyes and just pick one.
Yeah. So, what should salespeople do right now in this AI-driven world, in this crazy sense? I mean, in other words, I mean, they've got to be able to shape and change the customer's perception of what change looks like. That, as to the reason why they may want to buy something.
Right. Well, the biggest thing they can do is change, you call it their mindset, but they're understanding what your job is as a seller. Your job is not to sell your product. Your job is to help the buyer make a decision to change.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go with that as just the sort of your guiding thought for everything is, how am I helping the buyer make this decision to change? That's the first step that's really important. And you show up completely differently at that point, right? And for me, yeah, my career selling very large systems and close to $1 billion worth of systems, that's what it was all about. I mean, I was always the underdog. I was always selling for the smaller company, the newer company, the startup, selling 7, 8, 9-figure deals against multi-billion-dollar corporations. We weren't even $100 million in most of the cases. How do you do that? Well, you do that by showing up differently. And we knew we couldn't compete head to head on where the established companies were strong. We could compete by showing up differently and saying, well, how do we really help you make this decision change? How do we help you define what change looks like and why you should make the change and how you should make the change? And you break it down, then the final decision a customer has to make is, I call it the what, why, how, and who. Is the fourth decision is who. The last decision the customer makes is who they want to make the change with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've done the other ones, they've started developing a preference for you. And this is another thing, another thought then to leave the sellers with is, you show up differently because your job is to help them make this decision to make a change. Their experience with you from the get-go, when you show up that way, is different, and they start forming a preference for you. People are human, right? Your buyers are human. Who do I want to invest my time with?
Right.
This person is pushing their stuff at me, or this person's making a real effort to understand what it is we're trying to do and giving us some good ideas about how to think about it. That, we may not take all of them, but some of them, we're going to incorporate into what we do. This person's worth more of our time.
Wow. Hey, we got to end the show right there. This is absolutely terrific. Absolute masterclass as to what you've shared with us. Andy, I know you're kind of taking a little bit of a sabbatical right now, but you've written some great books. Give us the title of some of your books that people can jump out and grab, because you are.
Yeah, I mean, I would start with Sell Without Selling Out. And that was, my most recent book. And I don't think it'll be my last one, but the most recent. And it's all about how do you build this relationship with a customer that really forms the foundation for what we talked about here today, is helping them make decisions to change. And it's about connection, it's about trust building, it's about credibility, about integrity. It's the things that you need to really set yourself apart as an individual.
Yeah. I love it. And that's why it's an honor to have you on the podcast here today. You've been listening to my conversation with Andy Paul. Absolute. He sat at the forefront of sales for decades, tremendous amount of experience. So thank you, Andy. What is the Sales Hunter podcast? It's 2 episodes a week, one like this, where we do a deep dive with a subject matter expert. Second episode, single topic for me. Why? Because it's all about helping you see and achieve what you didn't think was possible. Do me a favor, leave me a review on your favorite podcast app. And hey, let me know. Let me know the struggles you're dealing with. I'm Mark Hunter, the Sales Hunter. Great selling.